Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala rasulihil kareem amma ba'd, and welcome to another video on the Islamic Knowledge YouTube channel. And before we go any further, if I can encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel and consider sharing this video with others so that inshallah it can benefit others as well. Now today's video and today's book is directly related to our incredible upcoming course on Islamic history, which is a one-year course led by the talented scholar Maulana Adil Sahab, and we'll be covering all the various empires of the Islamic world, right from the righteous Khalifas up until the Ottomans. The course is perfect for beginners and intermediate learners, and there's really nothing you need to do in this course. We'll give you the reading material if you wish to read. Otherwise, you'd be absolutely fine just attending the lessons or catching up on the recordings that will be given to you in your portal, and everything will be explained step by step, and it'll be very easy to follow. And this is going to be a perfect course even for someone who has no prior reading of Islamic history. So if you're interested, you can look into the description of this video and you will find the link there, or just go on our website www.islamicknowledge.co.uk and then just register for the Islamic history course, and I'll also put the link, like I said, in the description. Now today's video is all about a fantastic book that I read quite a while back, but it's a fantastic book for a beginner in Islamic history. Now this book is written with super easy English and is the perfect stepping stone for a beginner. To be honest, that's actually why it's one of our recommended reads in our student handbook for our course on Islamic history. Most people interested in Islamic history will have read this book already, but if you haven't, I want to speak to you about it. So it's titled Lost Islamic History by Firas Alkhateeb. The full title is Lost Islamic History: Reclaiming Muslim Civilization from the Past. Now the author of this book is Sheikh Firas Alkhateeb, Ustad Firas Alkhateeeb, who by the way teaches at Darul Qasim in Chicago, and I've had the good pleasure of visiting this absolutely beautiful institute, and I saw their amazing new campus, and they're really doing some, you could say revolutionary work, mashallah. So the book is divided into 12 chapters. So if you open it up, the book is divided into 12 chapters. The first is pre-Islamic Arabia. The second is the life of the Prophet. The third is the rightly guided caliphs. The fourth is the establishment of the Muslim state. The fifth is the intellectual golden ages. The sixth is the Islamic sciences. Number 7, upheaval. Number 8, Al-Andalus. Number 9, the edge. So to speak, the first few chapters are pretty easy to follow, but if we look at the establishment of the Muslim state, this speaks primarily about the Umayyads, and then the intellectual golden ages is all about the Abbasids and their engagement with various intellectual sciences, followed by a discussion on the Islamic sciences themselves, so fiqh, usul fiqh, etc. He speaks a little bit about that. Then the book really kicks off in terms of historical events from chapter 7, wherein he speaks about the Seljuks and the Crusades, which is all to do with the upheaval that took place in the Muslim world. And then we have a discussion on Al-Andalus, which is really unique in chapter 8. Then chapter 9, I would say, is one of the best chapters of the book, as the author speaks about the Muslim kingdoms that we don't too often hear about, such as Mali and the Delhi Sultanates. Then in chapter 10, it's called a rebirth, when he speaks all about the Ottomans. Chapter 11 onwards, he speaks about the decline of the Ottoman Empire, and then the 12 is kind of like a summary of everything. Now if we open the book, it is about 263 pages of essential reading, so not massive. And then every now and then within the page, as you'll notice this type of little pop out here, with this little tidbit where the author, you get this interesting design. The author discusses an interesting tidbit or a quote related to history. So you can see here, it might not be directly related to what's going on in the page, but here you've got, in the temple and porch of Solomon, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. Raymond de Glory, I don't even know how to pronounce that crusader's name. In any case, now I do have some notes that I made of the book that I'll be sharing on the Islamic Knowledge Telegram channel. So if you go to Telegram and type in @IK Courses, you'll see the channel turn up. Just join the channel and you should see a PDF of these notes, and it can just help you guide through the book, and it just might turn you to all the interesting points in the book. Now on to some interesting aspects of the book. So one aspect that echoes throughout the book is the importance of unity between Muslims, and how history seems to be teaching us that the more divided we are, the easier we are to conquer, and the more united we are, the more we succeed as a nation, and the more difficult we are to conquer, and the more easier it is for us to conquer other people or other nations and show them the beauty of Islam. So for example, on page 123, the author discusses how a key factor that helped the first crusade succeed in taking Jerusalem was the disunity amongst the Muslims. He writes, the siege of Antioch reveals much about the political situation of the Middle East late in the 11th century. The city was incredibly well defended and posed a considerable challenge to the invaders, but politically the city was an island. The great Seljuk Empire had disintegrated disintegrated in the years leading up to the Crusades. No longer was it one united political entity. Instead, petty Turkic emirs administered individual cities and seemed to be constantly quarreling. The major cities of Syria, Damascus, Aleppo, Antioch and Mosul were all disunited, and their emirs had been in perpetual war throughout the 1090s. When the ruler of Antioch, Yaghi asked for help from his Turkic brethren against the Crusaders that surrounded his city, he received no response. The other emirs were probably happy to see their rival being attacked, as his demise would mean their increased power and influence, which is just really sad to see that the Muslims were almost divided with one another, and that kind of helped the first crusade in many ways. Then on page 129, the author explains how that when the tables turned and the Muslims became united, it led to them reconquering Jerusalem, and how when they all united under Salahuddin, they were now able to, you could say, retake Jerusalem, and the Crusaders were the ones who were disunited. So it seems to be like a rule of history, or kind of unspoken rule of human life, that the more divided you are, the easier you are to kind of destroy. So the Crusader kingdoms of Jerusalem was now surrounded by a powerful united Muslim state under a ruler who believed it was his religious duty to liberate the city of Jerusalem. Further compounding their problems, unity among the Crusaders was at an all-time low. Organizations such as the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller regularly undermined the authority of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In the 1170s and 1180s, the Muslim world was united while the Crusaders were quarreling amongst themselves. It was the exact opposite of the situation in 1099. So now that we were united, we managed to retake Jerusalem. And then sadly later on, unfortunately, when the Ayyubids began to quarrel amongst themselves, the Mongols managed to take Baghdad. And because the Muslims were so disunited, they never had the courage at that point in time, and until obviously the Mamluks made sure that they did, they never had the courage to take on the Mongols, and neither did they have the capability because of their disunity. So he says here, meanwhile, the Ayyubid dynasty of Salah ad-Din's descendants was overthrown in 1250 by its own slave soldiers known as Mamluks, who established the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. Once again, a disunited and weak Muslim world faced an invasion from a foreign land, and once again, disaster would ensure. And then again, when Muslims united after the Ottoman interregnum caused by Tamerlane, they managed to conquer Constantinople. So the author writes on page 197, and he argues, or he indicates, that it may have been the unity that existed between the Muslims that helped them in conquering Constantinople. So he says here on page 197, in all, once Mehmet had reunited the empire in the 1410s, it continued with little residual hangover from the interregnum period. Under Sultan Murad II, the Ottoman state continued to annex Byzantine territory until all that was left of it was Constantinople and its environs. Murad attempted to capture Constantinople and finally eliminate the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire, but his siege failed to defeat the city's massive walls. The challenge of conquering the seemingly unconquerable city would fall to his son Mehmet II, whose name would go down in history as one of Islam's greatest military leaders. So this is the author, and there are some other interesting aspects as well, and the author discusses that a similar story kind of occurred in Spain as well, wherein the disunity of the Muslims may have definitely played a huge role in ensuring that the Christians take the land back. Now, some other interesting parts of the book that I found include page 172, where the author speaks about the incredibly rich Muslim emperor of Mali, whose name was Mansa Musa, and his journey to Hajj. So he says on page 172, and he's speaking about this journey that he took to Hajj, that Mansa Musa was actually quite a practicing Muslim. So he says here that when Mansa Musa reached Egypt, which was then ruled by the Mamluk dynasty, Mansa Musa left quite an impression on the local Mamluk officials. They recorded that he was exceptionally devout, never missing a prayer, and with a mastery of the Quran. In Egypt, Musa was said to have given out so much gold to the city's locals that unintended inflation wrecked the economy, and when the famous North African traveler Ibn Battuta visited Egypt 10 years later, he noticed that the local economy had still not recovered from the giant influx of the valuable metal. So this is how rich he was, but he was still, mashallah, a practicing Muslim. Then on page 135, the author discusses how the Christian European monarchs sent embassies to the Mongols to actually encourage them to take over the Muslim lands, and that might have played a role in the Mongols sacking Baghdad and destroying the Muslim lands. So he mentions on page 135, after repeated embassies sent by European monarchs requesting a Mongol invasion into Muslim lands, the Mongols finally mobilized an army with the aim of completely obliterating Islamic political power in 1255. So it seems like the Christian emissaries and embassies played a role in this. Another super interesting part of the book was the idea that a significant number of slaves taken to the Americas in the transatlantic slave trade may well have been Muslims. So he writes in a certain part of this book that a decent number of the actual Muslims that had been taken to the Americas in the transatlantic slave trade were actually Muslims. Another interesting part is where the author says that Aurangzeb actually disagreed with his father's Taj Mahal and found it quite wasteful. So he writes on page 211 that Aurangzeb actually wasn't too happy. The succeeding emperors charted a path back to traditional Islam. This culminated with Aurangzeb, the 6th Mughal emperor and the one who ruled over its apogee. His imperial title was Alamgir. He carries on and he says he famously disagreed with his father Shah Jahan's construction of the Taj Mahal, an elaborate and expensive tomb for his mother, which Aurangzeb saw as wasteful and against the spirit of what Prophet Muhammad had preached. I also found the author's idea of how Hanafism became more popular in northern India and Shafi'ism in southern India quite interesting. So he writes on page 187, he explains essentially that the Yemeni traders that came to these areas of southern India, or you could say Malaysia, Indonesia, they played a huge role in making Shafi'ism become more common there. And then the Ghaznavis, etc., that were more in Transoxiana and these Khurasani areas, they had an impact on northern India. Wallahu Adam, and this is just what the author is saying. He says here that it was through these rulers that Islam began to spread among the local population of the Malay archipelago. Traditional stories in the region commonly state that a king was the first to accept Islam, followed by his close advisors and family, and that Islam would trickle down into society from the top. These kings probably provided the opportunity for missionaries from further west, many of whom preached Islam through Sufism, to come and spread their beliefs among the locals, spreading Islam in much the same way as the Delhi Sultanate. A notable difference is that while in northern India there was a heavy Persian element to the spread of Islam, in Southeast Asia, in the missionaries tended to come from the Indian Ocean rim, particularly Yemen. Thus the school of fiqh that became most prominent in East Africa, coastal India and Southeast Asia was that of Imam Shafi'i, due to Yemen being a center for Shafi'i learning as well as a key hub in the Indian Ocean trade. Northern India, on the other hand, was more influenced by the Hanafi school, which was popular in Persia and Central Asia, which obviously it's a theory, but it's very interesting. Then on a lighter note, the author discusses on page 237 the shortest war that ever took place in the history of this world, so to speak. So he writes on, he says here, and this is like an interesting tidbit that is found within the book, and you find this on random pages sometimes. On 27th August 1896, Britain defeated Zanzibar in the shortest war in history, lasting only 40 minutes. The impetus for the war was the succession to the Zanzibari throne of a sultan who wanted to move Zanzibar out of Britain's sphere of influence. On page 182, we have the interesting story of the Chinese Muslim explorer, and this is something that I found very interesting, that he was actually a Muslim and he was a very, very famous explorer, and he's actually considered like a national treasure amongst the Chinese community, and he was a Muslim. So he writes regarding Zheng He that it was during this time that perhaps the most famous Chinese Muslim, Zheng He, became one of China's greatest explorers. A Hu from the Yunnan region in the south, Zheng He was favored by the Ming government as was given command of a fleet of treasure ships, and carries on and discusses about some of the wonderful explorations that Zheng He carried out. On page 197, we have an interesting fact that Muhammad al-Fatih actually knew about 6 different languages that would be spoken in his dominion. So he mentions with regards to the fact that by the time Mehmed II took the throne in 1451 at age 19, the Ottoman Empire was by far the premier power in southeastern Europe and Anatolia. It was multi-ethnic, flexible and powerful. There was perhaps no man who better represented that empire than Mehmed. He was fluent in at least 6 languages that were spoken throughout his domain. So you can see the language is very easy to follow, and it follows a really easy timeline for you to keep a track of, and all in all an incredibly beneficial book, especially for a beginner, and one that we do recommend for those who want to play a more active role in our Islamic history course, inshallah. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I do hope you see us and you join us on the Islamic history course. And if you did like this video, please do give it a like, share it with someone else who may also benefit, and jazakumullah khair wa ahsan al-jaza for watching the video. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.